One day, Tom Schreiner, a professor of New Testament at Southern Seminary, called me and said, Michael, there is this really old, important, historic church in Portland, Oregon. They have a terrible reputation. They chew up their pastors and spit them out. You'd be perfect for them.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
So we are stoked to have Pastor Michael Lawrence here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Hinson Baptist Church, and apparently he does not come this far east, usually, or at least in your day-to-day duties.
No.
Yeah. But we're glad to have you here.
Though we have a lot of members out this far and even further, but there's not much that draws me this way.
Yeah. I get that.
So, speaking of being drawn this way, how did you end up in Portland, Oregon?
That's a fun story. I had been the associate pastor at Capitol Hill Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. With Mark Dever for, at that point, probably 7 years, 8 years. And the elders and I had agreed that it was time for me to start looking for a church. I should be preaching more and leading more, but the longer I was there, the less I was doing of preaching as we kept hiring more pastors and raising up more guys, more mouths to feed, so I was actually preaching less. Anyway, so we just started praying that the Lord would open up the right place for me to go. And one day, Tom Schreiner, a professor of New Testament at Southern Seminary, called me and said, Michael, there is this really old, important, historic church in Portland, Oregon. They have a terrible reputation. They chew up their pastors and spit them out. You'd be perfect for them.
Nice.
And I said to Tom, why in the world would I move to Portland, Oregon? I grew up on the Atlantic Ocean, Charleston, South Carolina. My wife is from Connecticut. We have zero family west of the Appalachian Mountains. Why would I move to Portland? But the Lord just kind of wouldn't let it go. I didn't do anything with it and for about 6 months. And then I finally called the phone number that Tom had said, just call this guy and talk to him. And I was sitting in an airport coming back from speaking at a conference somewhere. I had a long layover. And so I thought, well, I got nothing else to do. I'll call this guy. And the guy was Todd Miles. And Todd and I ended up having a long conversation. And I got off the phone realizing, gosh, if there's even one guy like Todd at this church, I should think about
He talked to you about marijuana and superheroes? Is that what?
Neither of those were on his radar at that point. This was way back in 2008.
And obviously in those 6 intervening months, like they hadn't found anyone, they hadn't.
No, in fact, from the time of that phone call to me arriving at Hinson, it would be 2 years.
Okay. Did they have an interim at that time, like an interim senior pastor? Okay.
Todd was the interim preaching pastor. Yeah. Ron Mars was the interim executive.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was a long, slow process, about 2 years from that phone call to me actually being called as the pastor. In the meantime, they discovered, partway through, they had narrowed it down to me and one other guy. And at that point, the search committee discovered that neither of the two candidates agreed with the statement of faith. And the reason they discovered it is they were just working with what they thought was the statement of faith, but a previous pastor had just surreptitiously changed it and stuck it up on the website. And they discovered that the website was not the official statement of faith. The official one was different, and neither of us could sign it. And so they went back to the elders and said, do we have to start over? And the elders, led by Todd, said, no, we want to study the issue.
Yeah.
And they decided to change the statement of faith. So it was a long, slow, circuitous process.
Yeah.
But I eventually got here.
Yeah.
Wow. And then what has surprised you now? So is it 14 years?
14 years.
Or so?
Yep.
Yeah.
So you came as an outsider.
Yep.
What is that? A right coaster and
right coaster to an upper left.
Yeah.
We're trying to weave that in.
I was trying. It kind of flopped. But what surprised you as you have now been here for a few years?
Oh, there's so many things. We actually went through culture shock. We had lived in England for 4 years, so we knew what culture shock was. I just didn't realize you could go through it in your own country. But we did.
How old were your kids, like when you moved here?
My oldest was in 8th grade, so okay. 8th grade down to a toddler.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, we have 5 kids. And so we definitely went through culture shock. I to this day, I still think nobody here knows how to drive. You all drive like my grandmother, like you've got nowhere to be, and you're not even quite sure how to get there. I learned to drive on the East Coast, and I really learned to drive in Boston. So everybody here drives like my grandmother, and it drives me crazy. That still bothers me. It's good for my sanctification. We loved the beauty of Portland.
Yeah.
I mean, we've lived all over the world, and this is easily the prettiest place we've ever lived.
Yeah.
So we loved that. I was not used to people in stores trying to have conversations with me. We would be that first year. I remember I almost wanted to hit a checkout clerk because it was like he was hitting on my wife. Like, why are you asking her all these questions? This is rude. Just like, give me my groceries. I want to go. But everybody here wants to have, what are you doing this weekend? And what are you doing with these ingredients? I'm like, it's none of your business. It is literally none of your business. So stuff like that took a lot of getting used to. All the righteousness over recycling was also another thing that we had to get used to. But now I feel, I travel to other parts of the country, and I'm like, what, you don't recycle?
You don't compost?
You don't compost? Exactly. So there were lots of those sorts of things that we just had to get used to. We moved from a very formal culture. My wife is a Connecticut Yankee. I grew up in the Deep South in Charleston. We lived in Boston. We lived in D.C. And to move to a place that is so thoroughly informal as the West Coast, and particularly the Pacific Northwest.
It's a sin to dress up. Someone told me that on Sunday.
Yeah.
You don't preach in a beanie.
I don't preach in a beanie. I wore a beanie for a while. I don't look good in a beanie, so I gave it up. I tried to accommodate the culture, for a while. But yeah, it's
You had your tattoos removed later?
Listen, if you don't get a tattoo by a certain age, you just should not bother.
Yeah, I know. That's how I felt. I am rebellious. I don't have tattoos.
Yeah, that's right.
That's great. And I'm sure you do feel at home by now. I mean, it's been 14 years. It's a long time.
My kids are all West Coast, Pacific Northwest kids.
Yeah.
My wife and I continue to be on a regular basis reminded, we're not from here, but we love it here. And we wouldn't want to move anywhere else. We're very, very happy here, even though we constantly are reminded that we're not actually locals.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as we said, everyone listening to this is like, either interested in Pacific Northwest culture or, serving here in ministry, thinking about serving here in ministry, that sort of thing. Yeah. And I remember what I was doing in 2010. It's been a long time. It's 14 years, going on 15 years. What do you feel like has changed, culturally and here since you've moved here?
When we moved here in 2010, I think Portlandia, as the show, was just getting going. And it was kind of Portland at its high point in its Portlandishness, right? And of course, since then, the city's been through some hard times. COVID was hard. The riots were hard. Portland doesn't feel as happy as it did when we moved here.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel at ease with itself. That's sad. I am encouraged, though, even in the last couple of years, of feeling like, I think we're climbing out of some of the worst of it.
Yeah.
And the city is just as a city coming back together and prioritizing the right things and focusing on being a city where people would want to live. The city continues to attract lots of people that are fleeing other parts of the country. I think we're really cognizant of that.
Yeah.
We are constantly running into refugees from the Bible Belt. Yeah. Refugees from fundamentalism. I feel like I've got a church that's filled with recovering fundamentalists. and which I'm really happy with. I mean, it's a great ministry to have. I do wish that the city were. This is not a way that it's changed. I think it's a way that it'd like to change, and it still hasn't figured out how to do that. We're still an extremely white city. When I first came here 14 years ago, just to visit, I was walking through the airport, and I just found myself wondering, what's off? There's something off. I couldn't put my finger on it. And then all of a sudden I realized there are no brown people. Like growing up in the Deep South, growing up on the East Coast, you're constantly in these very diverse settings.
Yeah.
And moving out here and encountering just how relentlessly white it is was, as a white man, was kind of shocking. And that hasn't changed as much as I'd love to see it change.
Yeah.
Well, we were the last white-only state.
That's right.
In the Union.
No, there's a reason it's so white, right? This is a city that's filled with progressives who like the idea of black people, but are very scared whenever they meet one. And we know that because of some African-American folks that have joined our church from the East Coast and have just found this to be a very, very difficult environment.
Yeah. Yep. I grew up around here, but then we were in New York City for 7 years, like on the Lower East Side, and then back over here, and so striking. And even the one zip code east of here is the most diverse zip code in the state of Oregon, and it's like nothing compared to like a Boston or a New York or a Philly
or DC or or my neighborhood growing up in South Carolina. Are
a lot of the folks from your church kind of in the core? Like sometimes people talk about 205 or 82nd Avenue, like, kind of west of there. Is that, or are people commuting from all over? Like, do you know?
We're about half and half. So church of about 500 people and 500 adult members, and about half of them could easily walk or bike to church.
Yeah.
And the other half are driving from every point on the campus.
That's cool. Yeah. So that's a good mix of like, and there's different cultures within that, I feel like.
Oh yeah. And it's interesting because we've got, in our church, we've got old Portland people, people that grew up here, have lived there generations.
Yeah.
People that remember when Oregon was a red state and when this was a very conservative place. And then we've got lots of young people that have moved in that are the polar opposite of all of that.
Yeah. What year was the church founded?
1879.
Wow.
It is
amazing.
It is. It was originally First Baptist Church of East Portland. It was the very first church plant of First Baptist Church. And when East Portland and Portland merged, it became Second Baptist Church. And then it went through some name changes and a split, and the split got healed. And then a very famous pastor, an Englishman named Walter Elwell Hinson, who did battle with Harry Emerson Fosdick on the floor of the Northern Baptist Convention.
Nice.
He was quite famous.
Yeah.
He died suddenly, and they renamed the church after him.
Okay. See, yeah, people. I'm sure people ask all that. Like, was
What's
that
a Hinson?
Yeah, and did he donate the land? Did he give? Because there's churches out here that are like that. Or we used to be Calvin Christian Reformed Church, and nobody knows who Calvin is.
No.
Who was that? Was that your former pastor? So then we changed the name to Park Lane.
I have a feeling that the name on our cornerstone is Eastside Baptist. Because when the church split healed and they took possession of the current building, it's their fourth building. It was Eastside Baptist, and Hinson was the pastor when it was Eastside Baptist. So my guess is we're not far off from reverting back to our original name.
Yeah.
Well, you named the coffee shop after that.
That is exactly why we named the coffee shop Eastside Coffee Bar and Workspace.
Cool.
We will probably rebrand the coffee shop something else when the church reverts to being Eastside Baptist.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow,
But that's what's on our cornerstone.
Yeah.
You heard it here.
You heard it here first. My executive pastor has a plan.
Nice. So Oshawa and I are like, we're in our 40s. You're just a few years older than us. But thinking about like kind of spiritual formation, and I've been trying to do a lot of reading about and listening on kind of the stage of life and kind of midlife. I mean, I'm going to take a sabbatical next year for the first time. I'm about 20 years into ministry, and I maybe have 20 years of serving, in this way. What has that been like for you of like, just your spiritual formation, your different life stages of ministry of, with your wife and your kids and how are you processing and reading about that now?
I mean, when you're young, you're going to change the world, right? You're taking everything by storm and you've got great dreams. And then you hit middle age and you realize, wow, I don't think I'm going to achieve everything that I thought I was going to achieve. Yeah. And I'm not the person that I thought I would be by now. There's some things that are still like hanging on. And so there really is this reckoning, that you go through. When I was about your all's age, so this was 15 years ago or so, I read Ted Tripp's book, Lost in the Middle, one of my favorite books. I wouldn't say I'm a huge Ted Tripp fan. I think he's done some good stuff and other stuff. I'm like, this was a really, really useful book. He has this little phrase about planting new seeds and reaping a new harvest. Because what happens right about the time you're in middle age is you begin to kind of reap the harvest of seeds that you planted in your 20s and 30s. Yeah. And some of that harvest is great, and some of it you really regret. And one of the things that he did in that book, and lots of different scripture passages that he went to land this idea, is, hey, it's not too late to plant yet new seeds and reap a different harvest 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And it really encouraged me. I actually, when, what were they called? The little Apple, the Nanos, like before iPhones.
iPod.
The little iPod Nano. Yeah. And you could get something inscribed on the back of it when you bought one. Yeah, that's what I had inscribed on the back of that, because I was at this stage in my life where I was pleased about some things, regretting other things, and I realized, faith means trusting that God's not actually done. Yeah. The gospel is true. The Holy Spirit is at work in me, and it is never too late to repent of some things, to put some new habits and practices in place, and to begin to plant seeds for a harvest 10, 20 years from now. I think so much of my 14 years here has been about really committing myself to persevering, to finish well. I'm a little bit ahead of you guys, and I keep watching guys blow it. And they're not that far from the end. Like, oh, Lord, let that not be me. So many things that I've done are just basic things, especially in these middle-aged years. Really committing to my marriage and a kind of openness and encouragement between my wife and I, repairing things that need to be repaired, and putting in place some very transparent accountability with other pastors, both locally and nationally. It wasn't long after I got here that I committed with a group of guys that we're going to do a monthly call and a yearly retreat. And these are guys, I knew them all before they got married. They knew me soon after we got married, and our oldest child was quite young. These are guys that know absolutely everything about my life, and being willing to be open and honest with them and accountable to them, honestly has been life-changing. And I think has really helped me so far persevere. The race isn't over. And I don't want to assume that it couldn't happen to me. So being committed to that kind of radical honesty with some.
I like a lot of what you just shared, but it reminded me of like my favorite guitarist. He's been clean and sober for like 13 years or something, but Rolling Stone was interviewing him, and he was like, well, if I make it to January 23rd,
Right.
That'll be 14 years.
Right.
You know, just like that kind of idea.
kind of humility.
Humility.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Those lifelong friendships in the ministry are invaluable.
And they're hard to maintain.
Yeah.
Because of the pressures of ministry, because we end up moving. We started in one place, we're ending up somewhere else. So making the commitment to have those relationships and prioritizing.
People left ministry, or my denomination's not splitting, but about 10% of the churches are probably leaving because of homosexuality and stuff. And even some of my friends.
I just spent the week with Derek Buikema.
Okay, yeah.
Do you know Derek?
Yeah, I do.
He's the president of your synod. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was telling me all about it.
Yeah. And it's hard. And some people agree with me and are like, feel good about the direction of the denomination, but they don't like some of the details. And so they are going to find another denomination or go in. And it's painful. But what I take comfort in is like, we're still brothers in Christ. We're still brothers in ministry. Like we want to keep pursuing the kingdom together, but it's still a bummer. You know,
it is.
Yeah. So related to that, I mean, perhaps this issue of gender and sexuality is one of them. But what do you think the major challenges are that the church faces here, trying to do faithful ministry in Portland?
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of people assume, well, like when I travel, when I go back east, or different pastoral networks I'm in, people say, "Oh, what's it like in Portland?" Because they have
better than you think.
Exactly. Because they have this idea in their head that progressives and liberals are like the worst. They're mean. They're out to get you. You know, whatever. And it's because of the way our politics work, and because of the way a lot of the cultural war stuff works.
Yeah.
I don't think that the greatest challenge here is progressive ideology or even various views on sexuality, though I don't share those views. I think the greatest challenge is almost a kind of apathy. People just don't care. They're just not asking spiritual questions. Or they're asking questions, but they're not really interested in answers. They're just interested in more and more questions.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of evangelistic conversations that I have every week, probably, where the response is like, "Oh, that's so nice for you." We live in an affluent place, in a beautiful place, in a place where people have great liberty to be and do whatever they want to be and do. And they like it. And breaking through that, I think, is part of the challenge.
Yeah. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. No, something struck me that you said in passing is that you have weekly evangelistic conversations.
Sure.
I honestly don't know how common that is among pastors that are, especially in like a senior teaching position. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but is that like...
I don't know. I guess I'm just always looking. When I say an evangelistic conversation, that doesn't mean I've gotten all the way through the gospel and have asked them to respond. It just means I'm having a very deliberate conversation. It might be with the person cutting my hair.
Yeah.
It might be...
They would say a spiritual conversation.
Yeah, they might call it a
whatever.
spiritual conversation.
Yeah.
It might be the nurse in my doctor's office. All sorts of different contexts. But I'm always looking to press past the Portland nice small talk to actually have a conversation about something real and meaningful. And I try to get out as quickly as possible. Yeah, I'm a Baptist pastor.
Yeah.
You know? Like
I do the same thing.
Myself.
It's awkward, but then you get interesting questions.
Exactly.
I mean, a lot of times they're just like, I have always wanted to ask a pastor. I mean, it could be as basic as, how come my parents' priest can't get married, but you're married with kids?
Yeah.
Like, what? How does that, you know?
Yeah.
And it can be superficial, but it can also go deeper.
It doesn't have to be superficial. And obviously, you only take the conversation as far as they're willing. But I think as pastors, we should always be looking to have as much of a conversation as... I'll tell you one story. I was So this will shock some of the listeners, but probably not most of them. I'm a member of the Multnomah Whiskey Library, and it's one of my favorite places to go. And I was there with some friends from church, and there was we were interacting with our server, and we noticed that he had a cross tattooed on one forearm, and an obscure verse tattooed on a different forearm. And so we asked him about it, commented on it, because people like to talk about their tattoos. That's why you get them.
Yeah.
And so we asked him about it. Got into this great conversation with our server about Christianity. We invited him to church, and lo and behold, the next Sunday he showed up at church with a bouquet of flowers for me. And which I've not had somebody give me flowers before at church.
Maybe just put them up front of the church. It's nice.
It wasn't even Mother's Day.
But he came faithfully for 3 or 4 weeks. We went out to lunch several times. We had quite a few conversations. He's moved on. I don't think he may still be in Portland. He's not at the library anymore. I don't know. I'm just always looking for those kinds of conversations. And I think they're there to be had if you're looking for them.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So how do you think through this city as a missionary context, right? Like early 2000s, the missional church movement grew. How do you take insights from the mission field like Leslie Newbegin and apply it in a like North American context?
Yeah.
As you do church, and let's look at both sides, what changes about ministry now that you're in Portland and not in, like, let's say, D.C.?
Yeah.
And then what is utterly unchanged?
Yeah.
And how do you think through those two things?
Yeah. The story I often tell about that, the change, the contextualization piece, is a conversation that Mark Dever and I had right as I was getting ready to move here. I knew that we would need to renovate some of our office space. And so I'm sitting there talking to Mark, and he had been through the same thing. He'd had to renovate. And he says to me, well, I just thought nicely appointed lawyer's office because it communicates trust and stability and seriousness. And I just filed it away. I said, right, nicely appointed lawyer's office. Nice. Well, okay, so the first couple of years there was no money to renovate. But finally the money was there to renovate. And it's time to renovate. And I'm thinking, nicely appointed lawyer's office? No way.
Yeah.
No, I want coffee shop vibe, right? And so that's what we did. If you've ever been to my church offices, it's pastor's study meets coffee shop. I have a closet full of suits that I never wear. I have all sorts of ties that are way out of style, but it doesn't matter because I don't need to wear them. So there's definitely a presentation and a vibe that's changed, right? So I've had to learn informal culture because that is the culture out here. It's an informal culture. I've had to think about in our congregational worship, how do we communicate reverence for a holy God, but in an informal idiom rather than a formal idiom? Mm-hmm. So there are those kinds of things that have definitely had to change. On the other hand, certain things have not changed at all. The gospel is still front and central. And I remain convinced that God does his work through his word in a world gone awry. Yeah. It's not my ideas, it's not my cleverness, it's not my words that raise the dead, it's God's word that raises the dead. Mm-hmm. And so our ministry is a word-centered, word-driven ministry. And I'm looking for any and every opportunity I can in our formal, structured ministries and our informal ministries to get the word of God out through preaching and teaching and conversations, because I think that's how God works. He works through his word by his Spirit. And that hasn't changed at all. It feels different. The idiom is different. The preacher dresses differently. The service feels way more relaxed. Although I think there's still much of the East Coast in me. People come to Hinson, and I'm sure they still feel like this is very formal.
Yeah.
But from where I come from, this is so casual.
Yeah.
But anyway, so those are some of the changes, but some of the things that have remained the same.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Huh. So when I was in New York, I was in the fellows program with Tim Keller.
Yeah.
And I heard him say once that, in New York, we're all about money here. And, like money, power, possessions. As in LA, it's a lot about how you look. Boston, your intellect, where you went to school.
Yep.
What do you think that is for
Portland? Yeah, if I had to put one word on it, that's hard.
Yeah.
Freedom, authenticity, personal liberty to be who you want to be, to pursue your happiness, how you're going to pursue it.
Yeah.
Those are the things that jump out at me. I think there's a
libertarianism,
a kind of a left libertarianism. Yeah. Not like a right-wing libertarianism, but a left-wing libertarianism. Wanting to throw off whatever shackles, whatever customs that kind of get in the way of you being you. Mm-hmm. That feels very much like Portland to me. Some of it seems tied to a pursuit of pleasure. Portland has always been a port town. And so there are certain aspects of port towns around the world that are really evident here in Portland. But it's not just pleasure. It seems to be about the emancipation of the self from whatever would constrict it or bind it. That's what I think of when I think of Portland.
Yeah. Is there a group in your church, maybe it's even a small group, but of folks that grew up in the Baptist tradition and then are kind of like, I'm going to move to Portland and throw that away, but they realize down the road a little bit, like, I need the Lord. I need a faith. I need other people that are.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. We've got all sorts of folks in our church who grew up in a tradition, maybe here in Portland, maybe somewhere else. It might be a Baptist tradition or a Bible church tradition. It might be a very fundamentalist tradition. Yeah. And they found themselves walking away from it. And then they found us and realized, oh, wait, I can hang on to my theology, what I've actually always believed, but I don't have to have all this other stuff. I don't have to have all this other baggage.
Yeah.
We've also had quite a few baptisms and people coming back to the faith because of the coffee shop. The coffee shop that we opened that serves our neighborhood, it's a nonprofit coffee shop. People walk in, it's staffed by church members, and at any given moment, a third to a half of the people in the coffee shop customers are probably church people. But the other half are just neighborhood. And people are real loyal. They become regulars, And so they start meeting our staff. They start meeting church members, and they are introduced to a vision of what it could mean to be a Christian.
Yeah. That's way
not what they thought it was.
Yep.
And it's revolutionary. Yeah.
That is great. How long has the coffee shop been open?
We opened it right on the eve of COVID.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So that's pretty recent, I think, but coming up on 5 years. Wow.
And COVID was the best thing to happen to the coffee shop. We opened it, I don't know, 6 or 9 months before COVID hit. And it's hard to get traction, but all of a sudden the pandemic hit and everyone's confined to their apartments. And they want to get out. They need someplace to go. And unlike most Portland coffee shops, ours is really large because of the space that we have.
Yeah.
And so even with all the space restrictions, we were still able to have people in the building.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden the neighborhood discovered it, and it's taken off from there. And we love serving the neighborhood.
Yeah. That's cool.
And there's no fish on the wall.
There's no fish on the wall. There's actually a firewall. It sits under our 501c3, but no money flows from the coffee shop to the church. It's in fact the other way around. We invest in it.
Yeah.
It's not in your face Christian. It's not cheesy. It's not cliched. It's genuinely just
probably really good coffee.
We're trying to serve really good coffee. We serve Proud Marys. So. And it's a nice space.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So is the goal for it to be financially self-sustainable in and of itself?
Yeah, we want it to be able to do is support itself.
Okay.
Which it's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, we did a coffee shop up in Seattle 20 years ago, and it was a lot of it sounds really similar to what you guys are doing. And it was open for like 18 years, which we took as a huge.
That's huge. Yeah,
through several locations and. Yeah, but and it was a similar story. I mean, just getting into the community and having a space that people feel welcomed. They feel like this is their space.
That's right.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I'll have to go check it out. I haven't been to that yet.
It's a good space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is.
And I'm really proud of my staff and how hard they work to build relationships with our neighbors. After the Dobbs decision, our building was vandalized. An Antifa group came through and vandalized it. And it's because we rent out part of our building to First Image as their administrative headquarters. There's not a clinic in our building. It's just their administrative stuff. But it became a focus, a target for opposition and protest after Dobbs. And a lot of damage was done, graffiti and broken windows and stuff. The neighborhood was really shaken up by it because then our neighbors know us.
Yeah.
And they like us. And they know that we are really working hard to try to love and serve our neighbors. So they really came out that night and supported us. A whole bunch of people ended up gathering in the backyard of one of our houses there. And we're trying to comfort them because they're upset on our behalf. I think that there's so much good that can be done simply by, like Jesus said, just loving your neighbor and seeking to be a good neighbor. Yeah. And we've had multiple people, they know we're Christians and they have no interest in becoming Christians, but they have said to us, we've had to change the way we think about Christians because of you.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great.
That's kind of that pre-evangelism.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, you're actually changing the plausibility structure that they have in their mind.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. We've become really good friends with these people over the last 3 years. In fact, their daughter went to Costco with us last night just to because my daughter invited her. But the very first time that she met my wife, she was like, "Do you want to hang out on Sunday mornings?" I always ask that because I don't want to be around the Christians. And my wife was like, "Oh, actually, I'm a believer. My husband's a pastor." And she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just kidding." But she, Lily was like, "No, you weren't.
No.
That's your opening line with every family." But we've become really tight with them.
That's
and I hope that I think they would say that of a lot of their, they went to Lewis and Clark. That's where they met. And I think they were just fed for a long time of this is what Christians are like. And the husband has said to me, we can't really figure you out.
That's the goal.
That is the goal. Yeah.
I want our neighborhood to look at our church and not be able to explain it apart from the supernatural work of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's powerful. So I think the last topic that we wanted to chat with you about is leadership development.
Yep.
So I've known a handful of folks.
You guys are known for that.
That have gone through the Capitol Hill Baptist
the
internship program.
And we do something similar here.
So just talk about that. As a Multiply PDX network, we want to help our churches raise up church planners, do residencies, find ways even guys coming from out of town.
Yeah, that's right.
Connect them in, help them learn the ropes of Portland. Yep. How do you guys do that? What's some of the fruit that you've seen in that whole process?
I think it begins with a conviction that one of the responsibilities of the elders in a local church is to raise up the next generation of elders. Mm-hmm. But not just for our church. We want to be a net exporter of elders. Mm. We want to have more elders in our church than we need so that we can send them out to plant other churches, to revitalize and strengthen other churches. We want to be a net exporter of elders. So you've got to be convinced that's our responsibility. And you've got to teach the congregation that, hey, this is our responsibility as a church, because they're going to need to invest time. They're going to need to invest resources to make that happen. Yeah. They're going to have to be willing to share their pastor and their elders a little bit. So it started with that conviction and teaching the church that, and them really getting on board with it. So then what we've done is we actually started a formal pastoral residency. I used to run the one in D.C. at Capitol Hill, so it's really the same version. It's a version of that works in Portland. It fits Portland. It's another place of contextualization. And we bring these guys in, and a lot of internships are like cheap labor for churches, right?
Yeah.
But instead,
The magic stipend.
right? Instead, we pay them, we give them housing, and we don't ask them to do anything. We just invest in them. They spend 5 months with us, doing a lot of directed reading and writing, thinking about the church, thinking about ministry, thinking about the pastorate. We run a grad level kind of symposium once a week where I sit down and the other pastors sit down with the interns, and we work through the stuff that they've read and wrote the previous week. So that's about half of it. The other half of it is they're just underfoot. If I'm there, they're there.
Yep.
So if every wedding, every funeral, every staff meeting, every elders meeting, hospital visits, if I'm there, if one of the other associate pastors is there, they're there too. We don't ask them to do anything. We want to give them space to think, to reflect. I remember years ago, boy, this would have been in seminary, back when I was I was in presbytery with Tim. In the New England Presbytery, in my PCA days, and one of his colleagues, a guy named Rick Lentz, who was also in the PCA, talked about the fact that you need time and space to reflect.
Yeah.
Once you're in the saddle, once you're actually having to produce week in and week out, you don't have time to think about, why am I doing what I'm doing? What should I be doing? What is this thing called the church? No, because you've got deadlines. So we want to give these residents time and space to sit back, to watch, observe, be immersed in the life of it, but not be responsible for anything, so that they can really think and reflect and talk with us and with the elders. So that's kind of the formal structure we have. There's some other layers to it. We'll every now and then we'll hire kind of the best and the brightest out of the internship to come on staff for a 2-year stint as a pastoral assistant. But all of it is intended to eventually push them out. I will say, quite a few of the guys, I'll say to them, I think you should just go get a job and hang out here for a few more years. You just need some time to marinate and think and learn, because you've got a head that's full of knowledge and it's good theology now, but all of your instincts are wrong. All of your reflexes are wrong. And the only way that's going to change is if you just hang out in a good, healthy church for a while. And they'll do that. And we continue to multiply opportunities for them to teach, to preach, to do ministry, to lead various ministries or small groups or whatever. And then I'm constantly looking for opportunities to then send them out. In fact, when I leave here today, I'm going to be on the phone with a former intern who is in the final stages of candidating at a church here in our area, kind of talking him through the last stages of it.
Yeah.
So it's a very deliberate and yet very organic kind of process. We take a lot of risks. We'll take guys in, and some of them don't work out. Yeah. And I do think it's important, if you're going to commit yourself to raising up and training leaders and sending them out, you have to be willing to say to somebody, you should not do this. I love you, but you should just go get a job and be a supportive member in a local church somewhere. Yeah. But you should not be a pastor. And I've told many guys that, and they don't always like it. But if you're not willing to say no, then you probably shouldn't get into this business, right? But if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to take some risks, you will see some remarkable things happen, I think.
Wow. That's good. What percentage of guys come from outside the city versus within the city?
It's about half and half. Our best intern classes are classes where some are external, and then some are just guys that we've raised up from within our own church. It helps that we're a seminary town. So guys come to Portland for Western, and then they find Hinson, and they hang out at Hinson, and then we bring them into our intern program. The class I've got right now, 3 of them are are not from Portland. One is local from Portland. His brother is a pastor here in the area. And they find us in all sorts of different ways. They find us through books that I've written or podcasts I've been on, or they find us through seminary recommendations, or they apply to the internship at Capitol Hill Baptist in D.C. and can't get in, and so,
So they're like,
so they come to us. They try another one. That's right. But actually, what's interesting is increasingly we have guys that apply to CHBC in Washington, D.C., and they apply to ours at the same time. And a number of guys have said, I'm not going to do ministry in that context. I'm going to be doing ministry on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. I'd rather come and do a West Coast internship.
Yeah.
So
smart.
That's great.
Yeah.
You got anything else for?
No, it's just been a delightful conversation. Yeah, I'm really thankful that we were able to be together and kind of pursue this. If people want to learn more about your ministry or Hinson Baptist Church, where could they go?
Yeah, they can go to our website, obviously, hinsonbaptist.org. So our website will tell you a lot. You could drop by our coffee shop, which is on at Southeast 20th and Hawthorne, right around there.
Nice.
So feel free to drop by our coffee shop. Would love to meet you. You can find me on the Gospel Coalition website, on the Nine Marks website, on the Simeon Trust website. So different ministries that I'm a part of.
Yeah.
But if people want to learn more about the church, the best thing to do is just come, meet some of the people, hang out with us for a bit.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.